Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios national political correspondent, Alex Thompson.
Hey, everyone. It's been a historic week, to say the least. And today we have a slate of guests to talk about the 2024 election, everything from the 2024 election to the upcoming hurricane season. Without further ado, I'm excited to welcome our first guest. He's a senior campaign advisor to former President Donald Trump. Welcome to the Axios stage, Jason Miller. Thanks for coming. See you. All right, so let's get started. If on November 5th, if Trump wins, what's the reason why? If he loses, what's the reason why?
Voters want to change in the economy. Voters want to change in the border chaos that we're seeing. Voters want to change with the crime that's happening in our streets. That's fundamentally the change that I think this election will be decided on. And particularly when you look at Kamala Harris now taking the reins as a Democrat nominee, she's not going to be able to outrun Joe Biden's record. I mean, particularly when you look at borders are, which, by the way, I might set the Guinness record for saying borders are most number of times in 15 minutes. Sorry, but I do have to bust Axios' chops on that one.
And if he loses, what's the reason why?
He's not going to lose.
He's not going to lose?
No.
I was listening to former President Trump's rally last night. Does he not know how to pronounce Vice President Harris's name, or is he deliberately mispronouncing it?
In fairness, Chuck Schumer mispronounced Kamala Harris's name over and over.
Well,
hold on. But even in her Twitter description, it even says, because everyone gets her name wrong. So it's perfectly understandable. He also got it right a whole number of times, but maybe we'll just say Vice President Harris, or maybe we'll just say the borders are. People know what we're talking about.
Okay, so does he know how to pronounce her name?
Oh, of course, but people pronounce it both. Like I said, Chuck Schumer pronounced it Kamala.
But I think you probably think that former President Trump is smarter than Chuck Schumer. So why is he mispronouncing the name?
Well, you know what? He's taking his lead from Chuck Schumer, and he's going to follow. However Chuck Schumer wants to pronounce Kamala Harris's name, then President Trump is going to follow. That's only fair.
All right. Tim Alberta, the Atlantic's Tim Alberta, he embedded with you guys for a while, and he basically wrote a follow-up piece after Vice President Harris to the top of the ticket, and he basically said that you guys had prepared a campaign just for Joe Biden, and that this basically rattles your plans. How do you respond to that?
I disagree on that. Admittedly, I didn't read all of Tim's piece. Like most people in battleground states, I don't read The Atlantic all the time. But where I was spending my time reading was about Kamala Harris's efforts to raise money for the Minnesota Freedom Fund. Sean Michael Tillman, one of the people who were released, who got bailed by Minnesota Freedom Fund, that went out and killed someone just 3 weeks later, now serving a life sentence in Minnesota. But when you look at the 2024, the general election, we're ready for everybody. And now, I personally thought it would be maybe a week later. I thought what Joe Biden might try to do is try to get through the BB meeting, try to look presidential, try to do something on the foreign affairs space. But we're ready. The research is done. The polling is done. The ads are cut. It was a matter of when, not if. So I would disagree with what Tim wrote at that point.
Do you guys have any plans for counter-programming at the DNC? Heard maybe that there could be a border trip coming?
A number of different things that are on the table, but I also don't know what that Democrat convention is going to look like. I mean, of course, they're doing the virtual nomination, it looks like, on August 7th, but then also with all the pro-Palestinian protesters that are going to be out there, it seems like the Democrats have a bit of counter-programming on their own end, so we'll see if we can outstage that.
Take us behind the scenes a bit, after the assassination attempt. Where were you when you found out? What was Trump like on the plane afterward? Just bring us behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was very much a It was a frightening moment. So I was not there with the president, and I was with him at Mar-a-Lago the day before. And when he said he was not going to announce his VP pick the next day, I said, well, I'm going to go home back to Northern Virginia and swap out suitcases, and I'll see you on Sunday as we head to Milwaukee. And I was watching on TV like millions of other people, and it was just horrifying and to see that happen in real time. Very relieved when I heard the president's voice, when I heard you could hear the audio if you were watching on TV, so you knew that he was alive. I can only imagine what I would have thought if I was there in the audience or backstage, what they call OSA, kind of the staging area right off stage, where I normally would be for a speech. But clearly with the resignation of Kimberly Cheadle this week, by the way, I don't know why it took an entire week for Cheadle to resign. I thought that it just looked very disgraceful. I'm very appreciative for the Secret Service agents who were there with President Trump, his immediate detail, the people who literally leapt on top of him, put their own life in harm's way, but it's a scary moment.
Do you think the Secret Service deliberately withheld additional resources?
So I can only speak to how President Trump talks about his detail. I can't speak to any of the security measures that the Secret Service has. That's not something, I'm on the campaign side. I'm not going to get in the middle of, there are going to be investigations, whether it be from the Secret Service, whether it be from Congress, whether it be from the White House. It'd be inappropriate for me to go and weigh in on that. I'm not a security expert, and I certainly don't know the inner workings of it. Although I would say where I was disappointed is I would have thought that President Biden would have addressed that last night. This is essentially his farewell address, and he didn't even bring up the fact that his lead political opponent was almost killed. It was within a quarter inch of him being killed. And I thought President Biden really missed an opportunity last night to unite the country around that point. I thought that was very short-sighted.
Are you getting all the security you need now?
Again, I'm going to not get in the middle of the Secret Service and what their protocols are, but we have to make sure, it doesn't matter what party you are, or if you're not even technically with a party, if you're a major candidate for office, you have to have that security. That's a real slippery slope to turning us into a third world country.
The ABC News debate, is it going to happen?
A debate will happen. I'm not sure if it'll be ABC.
So you're non-committal to the ABC debate for now?
Non-committal to who it'll be with, but not only will there be another debate, but there should be multiple debates. That's something that President Trump himself said last night. We do think that there should be some diversification in the outlets for who host a debate, but I think the public would be sold short if we only did one debate against Kamala Harris in the general election. We'd like to see multiple debates.
So we're talking 2 debates, 3 debates, 4 debates?
To be determined, but there should be some diversification in voice. So whether that's we have one of the outlets, maybe it's a Fox News or a Newsmax or somebody on that side, in addition to potentially a major broadcast partner. The other thing that really surprised me from the Democrat side is I do think that one of the Spanish language channels should be involved with that as well in the general election, and probably should have been done as part of the CNN debate, the first one, but I hope that does happen as we look into the fall.
I feel confident the Newsmax debate is not going to happen. After the assassination attempt, a lot was made. You've also talked on in previous interviews about the new Trump. He is a sort of changed man. Watching the rally last night, new Trump didn't last very long.
Well, I think when you go through an experience where you're literally a quarter inch away from being killed, that's going to change you. And I can tell you that has changed President Trump. I would also point to the fact that the extreme rhetoric from the Democrats and on the left is also going to tamper some of that and also impact it. And I've been surprised that this was only a week and a half ago. We talk about previous assassination attempts in U.S. history, whether they've actually done it or whether it's just been an attempt. Usually these things are massive front page stories for months, if not years. And I do think that it's been a real shame that the news cycle has moved so quick that many people are pretending like this never happened. I mean, literally a quarter inch from killing the front runner for President of the United States, and so many have already pushed it off to the side. And that's, again, why I brought up Joe Biden it sounded like a presidential farewell address, although I don't think Biden wanted to go. You could tell he had he woke up and had a little buyer's remorse of what decision that he had made. That shouldn't happen. It doesn't matter who you are, what party you're from. If there's an assassination attempt, that should be something like that should change some of the rhetoric, but immediately became so hostile and so negative in attacking President Trump, then of course he's going to defend himself.
How did it change him?
Well, it makes you realize that we're only here for a brief period of time. Life is very fragile. And again, it changed, not only changed President Trump, but keep in mind that Corey Compertor, the fire chief who was killed, the two other men who were injured at that, but especially in the case of Corey, the fire chief, I mean, he didn't survive. I mean, there's a family who no longer has a father in that household. So this is a very serious matter.
In terms of, so I'm going to pivot to, he's meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today. Obviously, it's been reported that President Trump was upset that Netanyahu recognized that Joe Biden won. How did the meeting come about? Who reached out to who first?
So typically we wait until after the meetings to put out an official readout and not talk about it. I wouldn't want to get ahead of the president's meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Obviously, they work together very well on a number of things, whether it be the Abraham Accords, whether it be moving the embassy to Jerusalem. There are so many things, broader peace in the Middle East, Golan Heights. I'm going to let them go and have their meeting. It wouldn't be right for me to go and start framing it in advance.
Well, I'm not saying the readout. I'm just saying who reached out to who first.
I'd just say that obviously they communicated beforehand, and they've communicated a number of times, but again, wouldn't want to go with the who reached out first.
Will Jared Kushner be there?
I haven't asked.
Okay.
So.
President Trump told Fox News just the other week that he thought Joe Biden was going to stay in. He said, Joe Biden has an ego. Jill Biden likes the life. Was he surprised?
I think maybe at the speed in which they got rid of Joe Biden, but there was no surprise that they made the change to Kamala Harris. In fact, if you go back and look in November of 2022, when President Trump announced, he was even saying back then that Joe's not going to go the distance, rally speech after rally speech. But where this race changes is the fact that there's now much more of an ideological component to it. So with Joe Biden, we had incompetence, but with Kamala Harris, we have incompetence plus being radically liberal. And I think that is going to change, particularly the voter turnout dynamics. She'll excite the Democrat base much more, but when it comes to working class voters, people who are upset with what's happening with the border, I mean, she can't outrun the border czar label. Or when you look at what's going on with the economy, that's still going to be front and center. All the research shows that voters very much believe that she was Joe Biden's right hand, or is still Joe Biden's right hand. She has to own that Biden record. But now we get to go back to California. Now we get to go back to the Minnesota Freedom Fund in bailing out criminals. We get to look at all of that as part of the equation for 2024.
What was his reaction when he saw that Joe Biden was withdrawing from the race?
Wasn't with him at the exact moment that it happened, but I think he thought it was...
What was the first thing he said to you?
Yeah, well, that was a pathetic way to do it. This is a president of the United States. He just put out a tweet in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, that's just complete lack of self-respect to go and do it that way.
And you said you were surprised by the speed. You just expected it to last. Like, when did you expect?
Oh, the following weekend. So
Okay.
it was, but again, the ads were cut, the research is done. We're ready to go against Kamala Harris. That's not an issue. But I think also when you look at Joe Biden last night, he did not look like someone who wanted to go. He looked like someone who very much still wanted to be there. And I did think that was a little bit surprising that Biden never actually said why he was leaving. Because it is, in crass political terms, he got knocked out on the debate stage and he's losing the race. And that's why he's stepping aside. But to the point about what the general election looks like, President Trump is still leading in the polling against Kamala Harris. She'll get a little bit of kind of a short-term bump, I think, just as the media kind of crowns her and she ascends into that top role. But then as voters start to tune back in and say, wait a minute, she was at Joe Biden's side as they destroyed the border, destroyed the economy. We want to change. I do think that what little bump she gets shifts back.
Let's go a little bit behind the scenes of the debate, which is why this whole race has been shaken. What was Trump's reaction right after he got off stage? Or the first time you saw him get off stage, what was his reaction?
President Trump knew that he had a good night, and of course we thought he had a very good night as well. I think everybody was shocked by just how bad Joe Biden was. I mean, he was in the log cabin in the woods for 10 days. Meanwhile, we had 55 ISIS terrorists running around the country, and he goes to Camp David for a week to work on debate prep, and he came out so bad. From us behind the stage, because obviously I wasn't out on the stage with the president, we knew as Biden was literally walking to the podium that something was wrong. I mean, Joe Biden has a couple of different walks. He has kind of not doing very well physically walk, and then kind of juiced up walk. Then he had the doing not very well physically walk, and then he starts coughing in his first answer. And then, of course, with his response of saying that he beat Medicare. Yeah. And President Trump said, "I don't know what you said. In fact, I don't think Joe Biden knows what he said." Then we knew that this was going to be a massive night.
Is there something that he said on the plane afterward? You can give us some insight about his reaction.
That's a good question. I don't remember any specific line, but he knew that he had a very good night, and he was ready for it. And the one thing I was surprised about is that Joe Biden, especially since he had his pick of outlet, his pick of moderators, his pick of structure, that Joe Biden didn't seem to know the rules very well. Many of his answers were finishing short, or he lost his train of thought. In many cases, given someone like Biden, 2 minutes to speak is too long. There's too much that needs to go and fill in. And I thought President Trump really, for someone who doesn't do traditional debate prep, really hit the marks perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate you making the time.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Please welcome to the stage Axios congressional reporter Stephen Newcomb.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Newcomb. I'm an Axios congressional reporter. We're so excited to have you guys here with us today. And I'd like to welcome our next guest to the stage to discuss the latest from Capitol Hill, the Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to start with the Prime Minister's speech yesterday.
Sure.
Generally, your thoughts, but also more specifically, he talked about Israeli efforts to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, into Rafah. That's a top issue for Democrats. Some of what he said doesn't track with what international groups have said about the reality on the ground. So just your thoughts on it generally, and the question about Israeli efforts to get aid into Gaza.
Well, thanks for having me. Listen, I've spent my entire career supporting a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. I want Hamas defeated. I don't want them ever to be able to attack Israel or anyone else like we saw on October 7th. At the same time, I think this speech yesterday was very much about bolstering Netanyahu's political standing. I think it was a setback for the U.S.-Israel relationship. I think it was a setback for peace. I would have much rather had Netanyahu spending this week in the Middle East, in Israel, working to finalize this ceasefire, working to get the hostages out, bringing this war to an end, instead of trying to build up his political standing by visiting the United States. Listen, the reality is the conduct of this war and the inability of aid organizations to operate in a very chaotic space has ended up with far more civilians being killed than is necessary. It is simply not true that Israel has taken all of the steps that are required to make sure that you can get humanitarian relief into Gaza. It is simply not true that Israel has conducted its operations in a way that places a priority on civilian life. I thought it was pretty remarkable that the Prime Minister spent almost no time yesterday showing real sympathy for the literally thousands of innocent civilians that have been killed in Gaza. I grieve for them, just as I grieve for the innocent Israelis that were killed in the attack on October 7th. And I think most worrying was that there was really no meaningful path forward for medium and long-term peace. He announced yesterday, effectively, that there is going to be a long-term Israeli military occupation of Gaza. That is a disaster for Israel. It's a disaster for U.S. security. Obviously, no mention yesterday of a future Palestinian state, as Netanyahu and his coalition have given up on that goal. That is also a disaster for U.S. and Israeli security. So obviously, I support the right of Israel to defend itself, as do all of my colleagues. But the speech yesterday, I think, ultimately was a setback for taking the politics out of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
There's a political part of this conversation. How do Democrats voice their frustrations with the Netanyahu government, talk about the failures of the government when it comes to the conflict in Gaza and a larger regional conflict, while also making clear to voters that they still support the right for Israel to defend themselves and continue to be a strong partner of Israel going forward?
Yeah, listen, I don't think it's that hard. I don't think there is any choice to be made between Israel's right to defend itself and a concern for the humanitarian cost of war. The reality is that the targeting decisions Israel has made, especially in the early days of the war, were irresponsible. And there was far too little priority placed on civilian life. The effect of that decision is to make Israel less secure in the long run. So I stand up and make the claim that Israel has to care more about civilian life inside Gaza, not just because I believe there's a moral imperative to save lives, but because I believe that Israel's security is directly tied to their ability to reduce the recruitment material available to Hamas and other terrorist groups who seek to harm Israel. I want Israel to learn the mistakes we made in Afghanistan and Iraq when we thought we were properly defending ourselves by going into the Middle East with the military as our primary tool. It ended up, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, that the number of civilians that we hurt, the humanitarian nightmare that we caused, ended up growing support for al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Taliban in Afghanistan, to the point that they ultimately became strong enough to win back significant amounts of territory.
There's been reporting that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, has been one of the loudest voices in the Biden White House and the Biden administrations, pointing out the suffering of Palestinians. You worked with her in the Senate. Do you think that that's something going forward that needs to be a larger part of the U.S. foreign policy discussion in their negotiations and discussions with the Israeli government? And what does the Vice President bring to the table in her experience and her approach that might be lacking from the current approach by the Biden White House?
Well, I probably need to be very careful about speaking for the Vice President. She is going to unveil her strategy and thoughts on the Middle East in due time. But obviously, I did serve with her in the Senate. I've had a number of conversations with her about how she views America's role in the world. First of all, I know her to be a very strong supporter of Israel. You heard her echo many of the statements made by the president in the days and weeks and months following October 7th. She does believe in Israel's right to defend itself. She does believe in the mission to defeat Hamas's military capabilities. But yes, I think she has been intentional in her expression of real concern for the humanitarian cost. I also knew her in the Senate to be someone that was willing to challenge the lingering foreign policy consensus in Washington that often has us believe that terrorist groups, which are centered around ideologies, can be defeated through military power alone. And so I wouldn't be surprised to hear her challenge some of that consensus. I'm speaking more broadly than just the conflict in Gaza, and remind us that there are a suite of tools other than simple military power that can be just as effective or more effective in trying to reduce the power of terrorist groups like Hamas in the Middle East and beyond.
It's been a long 3 to 4 weeks for your party, sort of grappling with what's going on at the top of the ticket. Can you take us personally through your emotions of what that was like, the conversations, and do you think that the party ultimately has ended up in a better spot, a better place than it was, 3 to 4 weeks ago when you were having the discussion about who should be at the top of the ticket?
Yeah, so I do think we are in a better spot, and I think you can obviously see this somewhat surprising groundswell of enthusiasm for the vice president. I thought it was going to take us a little bit longer than it has to unite around her candidacy. From the beginning, I thought that she was the right choice, unquestionably, if President Biden was to make the decision not to run. Listen, I think President Biden still could have won. I think he had a path to win. I think it was made more difficult after the debate, but I still think he had a path, which I think made his decision even harder because he obviously has been an incredibly successful president. I don't think I've ever served under a president who's had a greater record of legislative success, and I still think he could have beaten Donald Trump, but he made the decision that Kamala Harris had a better chance, and what he did, the speech he gave last night was heroic. Listen, this race is going to be 1 or 2 points, one way or the other. Kamala Harris didn't improve Democrats' chances by 10 points. She might have improved our chances by 1 or 2. But what you've seen across the country is pretty extraordinary. And I think we have a chance to really grow turnout amongst young people, amongst young women in this country, in a way that maybe wasn't possible with President Biden at the top of the ticket. So I just give him tremendous credit for the decision he made, and I'm really excited to get behind Kamala's candidacy.
I got to ask you about the VP race. You work with Mark Kelly. Do you think he'd be a good VP pick? Do you have any thoughts on who Kamala Harris should pick to be under her on the ticket?
So, I think Mark Kelly would be a great vice president. B, I'm giving her zero advice on this choice. I think the only advice I'd give her is pick somebody that you think can be president of the United States. Other than that, it's really about who she feels comfortable with, who she thinks is going to be a good partner for her. So, all of the folks who have been on the short list look like great candidates, but this is about as personal a choice as she could make. I would hate to lose Mark in the United States Senate. He's been a friend for a long time. Gabby and I came to Congress together in 2006, and so I've known Mark since then. But I'm going to refrain from giving her any advice on that topic.
It's probably a smart call. There is criticism, though, from the right that the process behind which the party coalesced around the vice president as the nominee was something that was not grassroots up, but top down. I think that there's a question of what do you tell the millions of Biden voters who voted for him in the primary that this is now the candidate. So just your reaction to that criticism and how do you sort of justify that to the party's voters writ large?
Well, I mean, the only opposition that I see to the admittedly very short process that selected Kamala Harris as the effective nominee of the party is from Republicans. I mean, I don't see any groundswell of opposition from Democrats. I've read some early polling to suggest that nearly every Democrat is incredibly excited about this choice, while also, being, I think, appropriately respectful of President Biden's choice. The fact that Kamala Harris has raised more money, mostly in $3 and $5 and $10 contributions, not from party leaders, but from grassroots Democrats all over the country, is a sign that this is a decision and a transition, well, unorthodox, that united the party from, senators and congressmen to grassroots activists. I get it that, there's cynicism out there and folks might have thought that this whole thing was set up. Just to be clear, none of us knew about the president's decision until the minute he made it. None of us were calling each other to, pre-organize our endorsements of Kamala Harris. I got back from a run in the middle of the day, saw that Joe Biden had decided he was going to step down, and sat down at my kitchen table and typed out personally my endorsement of Kamala Harris. And I think that's what all of my colleagues did, that outpouring of support for her over the course of that afternoon and that evening. It was as organic as you can get. Why? Because we know her, because we've served with her, because we believe that she is the best of both worlds, that she can carry forth the legacy, a tremendous legacy, of the Biden administration, while also being a generational change and a unique talent. The first woman president in a moment when women's rights are under threat. To many of us, it was just clear that she was the choice.
I want to ask you about gun control. I know it's an issue that's very close to you and your state. But the reality politically going forward is either way, it's going to be a closely divided Senate, most likely a closely divided House. We obviously don't know the outcome of what the White House situation looks like in November. But if you were to talk to activists, specifically young voters, and you were to tell them or talk to them about the realistic path going forward in Congress about gun control, what do you see as opportunities in the next few years in the next Congress to make progress on that? And then why are you pessimistic, I guess, that you can't make progress?
So first, let me say something I agreed with Jason Miller on. I do agree with Jason Miller that it is pretty extraordinary that this country has effectively turned the conversation pretty quickly away from the assassination attempt. That bothers me. Both after the rash of assassinations in 1968 and after the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, this country decided to have a conversation about why it was so easy for political assassins to be able to turn their guns on politicians. And one of the things that we were unafraid to talk about, both after the 1968 assassinations and after the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan and Jim Brady, was controlling the ability of people whose brains are breaking from getting the weapons of assassination. And so, yes, I think we should be talking about what the Secret Service did wrong. And as an appropriator who funds the Secret Service, I'm talking to my Republican colleagues about how to do that appropriately. But I also think we should ask ourselves why we choose to give AR-15s, the weapons of choice of mass shooters and assassins, especially to young people, to 19 and 20-year-olds who are still able to buy these weapons, even while in America they can't buy a handgun. They can buy an AR-15. We should be talking about the role of permissive gun laws in effectively providing the means of assassination, the means of mass shooting. So listen, I think we have turned a corner on this issue. What we did in 2022 in bringing over Republicans to support measures that the NRA and more extreme gun organizations oppose, I think was a watershed moment. I believe we are going to pass a universal background checks bill in Congress. We are going to ban assault weapons. I think we will do both of those things in the next 5 to 10 years. They are both increasingly popular. There are more Republicans than ever willing to support both measures. And so I just believe that the anti-gun violence movement is a social change movement, not unlike the civil rights movement or the marriage equality movement, and it's a long, frustrating process, but eventually we're going to get both of these things done. And I think you will see Kamala Harris talking about this issue, as Joe Biden did, because they believe in this issue. They believe in limiting access to dangerous people to weapons, but they also know that this is a politically winning issue, that if you want to win in suburban Pennsylvania, if you want to draw out urban voters who experience the impact of gun violence on a daily basis, you have to talk about this issue.
Well, Senator, that's all the time we have, so we'll have to leave it there. But we appreciate you being with Axios today. Thanks for making the trip.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Axios senior climate reporter, Andrew Friedman.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm Andrew Friedman, Axios' senior climate reporter. Excited to be with you, and I'm going to totally change the pace of and topic of the conversation. We're going to focus on FEMA and what's next for emergency preparedness amid the upcoming hurricane season, which is probably not going to be a very tame one. I would like to welcome to the stage FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell.
Absolutely.
It's good to see you again. Thanks for being
Same
here.
Andrew.
I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been in the midst of Washington's hottest summer to date, or as my Instagram account has seemingly pronounced it, Hell's Front Porch. There's a push to make extreme heat and wildfire smoke eligible for major disaster declarations under the Stafford Act, with legislation pending in Congress. What are your thoughts on that? And what do current laws not allow you to do on heat and wildfire smoke that this would?
Andrew, the petition itself is, really well thought out and written and really highlights some of the challenges that, we as a nation are facing with extreme heat and wildfire smoke. I mean, I think yesterday, again, was globally the hottest day on record. We're seeing Denver had the worst air quality because of smoke in the Northwest. And so the things that we do at FEMA that really support this, which are really highlighted in that petition as well, is all of the work we do ahead of time. And that's the important part, is, these things happen, but there's not the quick response piece that I think people, recognize what FEMA does after a tornado or a flood. But we also have this entire part of our agency that works on preparedness and resilience. And we have had a Summer Ready campaign for the last 2 years to really help educate people about how to make smart choices for them and put their own plans in place for a variety of risks, but especially when it comes to heat, because people have specific needs. But also in our resilience side in mitigation work. We have had different programs through our mitigation suite of grants, through our BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, our Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, that have funded things like planting more tree canopy to create cooler areas, or putting generators on buildings that they can use for different cooling options during heat events, or even painting roofs white to help cool off. And so we know that this is coming every year. Just like we do with all severe weather, we really need to focus all of our efforts, I think, on what we can do to prepare and educate and reduce the impacts. As far as what we are allowed to do and not allowed to do, I know that the word heat and smoke is not exactly stipulated within the Stafford Act, but it doesn't prohibit us from providing assistance if something was needed. And so just as we do with every severe weather event, we take them on a case-by-case basis. We want to understand what the impacts are to the community. And again, as with all events, if it exceeds the capacity of the state and local jurisdiction, then that is a reason for them to ask for assistance from the federal government. And we would entertain those requests if it exceeded their capacity.
Mm-hmm. I think heat being one of those slowly evolving hazards where you only realize the full impacts of it, sometimes not till after, maybe even months after, when public health researchers classify the fatalities, is a challenge there. It's not like one of the other types of disasters that you deal with, that people can see them right away. Speaking of disasters that you can see right away, I'm wondering if you've been briefed at all on the unfolding wildfire situation in Northern California, and obviously in the Pacific Northwest. There's a town that's being hastily evacuated by a helicopter this morning, and in Western Canada, which obviously could affect the U.S. with wildfire smoke, and what actions you guys are taking maybe to prepare to respond to those.
Yeah, we receive a briefing every morning on all of the severe weather hazards that are facing the nation. And yesterday, we also get a weekly update from the National Interagency Fire Coordination Center that gives us an idea of what the current state of the firefighting efforts are and what to expect going into the future. They have, I think it was last week, went to preparedness level 5, which is the highest that they have. And yesterday they did brief that the next 48 to 72 hours are actually really critical for fire weather because of the conditions that we are seeing across the Northwest. And so our teams are engaged through our regional administrators. We have a regional administrator, and we have 10 different regions, and they are in close communication with the state emergency management directors. And what we have done, we have one grant that helps support that, and that's the Fire Management Assistance Grant. And we've taken away a level of bureaucracy, and because they're so quick, the regional administrators can approve those as soon as they get the request from the state. And we've been approving those 1 or 2 a day for the last, week or so.
Yeah.
And so even last night, I think we had 2 more that were approved because of these fires that are happening last night. And so we are in close communication with those state directors. We have staff embedded in the NIFC, so we can also stay up to date on what their needs are. And if we need to provide additional assistance for our other programs, like individual assistance or public assistance, we're able to move that quickly like we did recently in New Mexico.
How worried are you about the upcoming hurricane season and the capacity of FEMA to respond? We saw with Hurricane Beryl a Category 1 storm take out the electric grid or a significant portion of it in a major American city. That's not necessarily FEMA's responsibility to go in and turn all the lights on. That's on the utility. But it would seem to me that you must be gearing up for a pretty large response. And the question really is pertaining to funding. Whether you think, as you're dealing with more stronger storms, more extreme weather events, whether the funding has grown commensurate with the threat.
Yeah, I'll start with the threat itself, and then I'll get to the funding piece. This is going to be a bad hurricane season. I spoke with the director of the National Weather Service as well as the National Hurricane Center yesterday. They said, get ready. It's another week and a week and a half, and we're going to start to see the number of storms increase, and then we're going to have that continual threat of hurricanes throughout the rest of hurricane season. And I think you probably saw Colorado State University increased their projections. We don't expect a new projection from the National Hurricane Center till sometime in August. So we've been preparing for this even before the initial forecast came out, because our operational tempo these days is year-round. We used to prepare for a busy hurricane season and then adjust our resourcing to support that, but it's been 365 days a year. And so we are constantly making sure that we have the right resources and enough resources ready to respond, that we're providing the rest to those that have been out there so we can get them engaged again as needed. We're going to continue to go through that readiness cycle as these storms continue to approach. As it comes to the funding, I think you're very aware that our disaster relief fund is the source that we have that supports all of our immediate life-saving and life-sustaining activities, but also the long-term recovery activities that happen. And it's running short. We expect to run out of money sometime in the September timeframe. And so what we do is we always want to make sure that we have enough funding to support those life-saving activities. Mm-hmm. And we'll go into and we'll put measures in place to preserve enough funding to support a catastrophic response like something that we saw with Hurricane Ian, and have enough funding for that. I'm continually having conversations with my colleagues on the Hill as well as OMB and the administration to make sure that we are all aware of the status of this fund and what we're going to need to do to replenish it in case we get to a point where we have multiple catastrophic events.
Yeah, it just seems to me that when we have an outlook that basically raises the alarm to levels that we haven't seen in a long time, as a weather geek and as a climate reporter, it's just a bunch of blinking red signals for what's coming up. Yeah. And you look at the disaster relief fund, and it's always behind the curve, it seems like. In terms of needing supplemental appropriations and getting Congress to immediately act. So I think that's a challenge for your agency that you've had to deal with. Has there been any improvement over time?
Well, I think where we're at right now is we've gone into this situation about a dozen times, over the life cycle of the Disaster Relief Fund. Typically, we find ourselves in this situation when we are facing multiple catastrophic events, and we've had the appropriations, and we can look back historically to make our request. But what we've found over the last couple of years is that last year was the first time we could actually forecast this kind of deficit, and it's really due to a lot of the obligations that we're paying out for COVID-19. And so when we ended the incident period for that last May, the bills start coming in, and so, with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we're only allowed to ask for so much over what we had the previous year. So even though we anticipate it, we have to have these conversations about, okay, but this is what we think we're gonna need. It'll stabilize after we get the COVID bills paid off, but we're also seeing an increase in the storms. And so how long will it be stable before we have so many storms that we find ourselves in the same situation? This is something I watch daily. I get reports daily on where we're at. And it's a conversation we're going to have to continue to have to be able to meet the threats of the future.
Yeah. We've seen a few disasters now during which you've raised the concern about disinformation and misinformation campaigns. That was the case with the deadly fire in Hawaii. That was the case, I think, with one or two other disasters that you've spoken up about with campaigns from abroad, including China. What makes these such ripe targets for sowing division, and how does this challenge your agency?
Well, these people are experiencing their worst day, and they're vulnerable, and they're going to listen to a variety of different information sources to help frame the next steps that they have to take. And unfortunately, because they're so vulnerable, that makes them this target. And what I worry about is the fact that when we sow this misinformation into a community, then they don't have the trust. And what we saw in Maui was people that perhaps didn't even want to come register for assistance and get the needed assistance that we had available for them because they were concerned. And so I worry about this trust in our ability to support them and getting people to actually come in and ask us for help. I mean, we've always struggled with fraud. We always have people that are, taking advantage of the people that have just been impacted, registering under their names, getting their, benefits, and we have to work through that. This takes it to a whole new level of really trying to create even greater divisiveness and mistrust between the community and the government that's there trying to help them. It's a new challenge for emergency managers from the federal level down to the local level, and how we're going to be able to find the trusted messengers to get people to come in and get the resources that they're entitled to.
Well, it's just good that social media companies are putting up even tighter guardrails on misinformation, because they are very much not doing that. As we close here, can you name two things that are in your to-go bag?
Two things that are in my... I always have enough clothes that I don't have to do laundry for 72 hours.
72 hours, okay.
And a bunch of snacks.
Okay, like power bars?
No, I like those That's It bars. Those are my favorite. Those fruit bars, those are good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us. And I wish you good luck during the busy times ahead.
Thank you, Andrew.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. This is a blockbuster lineup today at Axios. We're very grateful for all of you joining us for these awesome conversations. We're also hugely grateful to our partners who make everything we do at Axios possible. So huge thanks to Bank of America for making today happen. They've been a partner of Axios since almost the very beginning, and I can't think of a more opportune moment to have a talk with a banker. We just had GDP numbers drop mere moments ago, so I'm very excited to welcome, for a View from the Top conversation, Bank of America's President of Retail Banking, Holly O'Neill. Holly, welcome to the Axios stage.
Thank you.
Hello. So Bank of America, one of the biggest banks in the United States, almost 70 million consumer banking clients. We just had GDP numbers out. From your vantage point, tell us the trends you're seeing in the economy right now.
Sure. Well, as you said, GDP just broke at 2.8%.
Pretty good.
Which is pretty good. So that shows some good strength in the economy. And, the consumer certainly always looks at the economy as challenging. They're watching to see what comes next. But we are really looking at the consumer today as being very resilient.
Yeah.
And we see the trends that reflect that resiliency. We have a consumer checkpoint research team that shows spending is up. There's great momentum there. Travel season is here, both domestically and abroad. So those numbers are coming in strong, and we're seeing the consumer moving and spending and traveling. And I think there are some signs that show we should be optimistic about the future.
Yeah.
The job market continues to be strong. Wages are good. And from an individual household perspective, balance sheets are strong. So we look at the consumer in a very normal environment, and they're borrowing, spending responsibly. Regardless of that, we are always working with our clients, to make sure they're prepared for what comes next. And, we really put that under the financial health umbrella.
Yeah. So I think it sounds like your data, your anecdote dives in exactly to what came out in this
Yes.
GDP number. I wonder if you go a little bit deeper there, like this concept of like financial wellness, right? So like the numbers now are good, but spin it a little more forward as far as like how strong balance sheets are and how confident people are
Sure.
in the
So
future.
we really look at financial health just like we do mental health and physical health, right? It's very important. And, as I said earlier, the economy is always changing. And I
Yeah.
think that uncertainty can create stressors for people because financial stresses are challenging, whether it's at work or, at home. So it's really important that our clients equip themselves with the tools to deal with it. And so we work with them around creating a budget, setting a plan, setting priorities, and giving them tools like better money habits for financial education so that they have the information they need to make sure they're setting themselves on the right path. And, one of those things is emergency savings and, like I said, a budget. So, that is how people prepare for the
Do you feel
inevitable.
like that kind of preparedness is baked into the anecdote and data at all? Like there's a sense of consumer confidence that underlies this, the numbers that just came out today. Is that because people have done the right kind of planning as far as financial wellness, as far as having that emergency funding, as far as feel like they're ready for what might
I think what you're
come?
seeing in the consumer data is, is always looming out there, and that's a little bit of uncertainty.
Right.
But we do know that consumers are confident and we see that in the spend data, right? So sometimes in consumer sentiment, you hear a little bit of ambivalence and uncertainty, but in the spend data, in the credit data, in simply the balances in their accounts, that's where we see the strength.
I mean, you use the word consumer confidence, which is like a really clear measure in the health of the
Yes.
economy, and you seem to sound a little bullish positive on that.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
When you go below the numbers, perhaps to lower, more middle-income communities, like what is your view on that? How does the bank approach those kinds of markets?
So first of all, financial health important to everyone, whether you're just starting out or whether you're more mature, right? But that focus in the LMI community, in communities that are just starting out, I happen to sit in my business in the retail bank, and really important from a macro perspective that we meet them where they are, right? And that's both digitally and physically, right, with our financial centers. So we do it in a whole host of ways. Digital is key because that gives us the reach to get to 68 million clients across the country. But also from a physical perspective, we have 30% of our ATMs in LMI communities. We have 30% of our financial centers in LMI communities. We reach out to the local communities with Better Money Habits, which is our financial education tool. We've done 800 programs this year in those communities around better money habits. So, we come at it from multiple perspectives to make sure people just starting out, LMI communities are supported in a way that's custom to them and personal.
Is this a way, like we talk about consumer confidence and the financial wellness, is this about like sort of widening the universe of people who have that? Because like at the probably the higher income levels, that's relatively easy and not super challenging. But like where the real it gets interesting is I think as you go into these other communities that may have been underbanked or less banked or not banked previously.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, it is more challenging, but we know that they're as digitally active and often cases more digitally active than the general population, so we can reach them digitally. And we also have custom programs that we target with those communities, like our affordable lending as one example. So, that one, we've deployed over $13 billion to help families get into homes, through down payment assistance and the like. So, education, physical presence, and specific programs where we're really trying to get in to assist those communities and get them a good start.
Let's slice and dice the demographics one other way to Generation Z, just entering the workforce, coming in, like at the start of this financial journey. What are the trends you're seeing there? What's the insights you have?
I have 3 Gen Zs at home, so I have
a very good
sample. They're smart, they're savvy, they know what they're doing. They're definitely forming the habits that they need for the future. That being said, they see the economy, they see the bigger picture, and they are seeing challenges with that, buying homes, saving for retirement. But when we look at the data, and we recently did a Gen Z survey, we see that confidence, we see the education, so they're really searching for the information that they need, and they're adjusting their behaviors. They're spending at non-name brand grocery stores to adjust their budgets a little bit. They're pulling back on discretionary spending. And so I think that's a great sign because Gen Zs they're just starting out. So it's a great sign that they're educating themselves. They're adjusting their budgets. They know they need to set a budget. So I'm very bullish on.
You're bullish, but it sounds like they're a little less confident than maybe the more set ones, but it sounds like taking steps to get
That's
there
exactly right. So less confident, but that is intuitive because they're just starting out.
Yeah.
Right? And so less confident because they see the broader world and but they're educating themselves and they're adjusting.
Right. Well, speaking of education of Gen Z, before we get the hook here, we're not talking about Gen Z without talking about TikTok, which might not be really our demographic, but instead of hitting on one fun thing, let's hit on one TikTok thing. What do you see about financial education on TikTok? There's huge trending things, no spend summer, under consumption core. I'm out of my depth here, but you've got Gen Z kids. What are they doing on TikTok?
Yeah, well, I have been on TikTok a couple times, I will admit, and I think it's fantastic that they are talking about it.
Right.
And they're using the platforms that they use to do so. And my personal favorite is the loud budgeting. So loud budgeting is you get out and you're not worried about saying, I can't go to that bachelorette party because I don't have the means to do that. And so they're very vocal about what they can and can't do, and that is because they're trying, to meet their budget needs. So I've tried some loud budgeting with my husband, primarily loud budgeting on his behalf. That has not worked.
Good to try.
I keep trying. So, most of them feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's a great sign because it enables them to really set themselves on the path.
And that comes back to that core what you mentioned, is sort of like education about it, like even knowing about it or talking about it is, I think, the first step on that journey.
That's exactly right.
All right, Holly, that's awesome. We won't do any TikTok dances before we have to get off the stage
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you so much
my children
for being
appreciate that.
here. Thanks to Bank of America. Mike Allen's going to come up for the big finish.
Please welcome to the stage Axios co-founder Mike Allen.
Thank you very much, Nick, Holly, and all your friends at Bank of America, Bob, Trevor, Larry. We thank Bank of America for making this remarkable lineup possible. Family is very important at Axios, and we're honored today to have Deanne Clyburn with us, who's been a friend for many years. So thank you for being a friend of Axios and for your great family. Batting cleanup, big finish. Congressman James Clyburn, the kingmaker from his native South Carolina, 32 years in the House, one of the most resonant, relevant voices in all of politics. He helped make Joe Biden, President Biden. He's a big supporter of Vice President Harris. He's the first African American to serve multiple terms as House Majority Leader. A living legend, Mr. Clyburn, welcome to Axios. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the honor of having you on the Axios stage. On Sunday, your phone rang, and it was President Biden. What was that like?
Well, the president called me a little afternoon, and before issuing his statement, to read to me the statement he was about to make. A bit disappointed, but I was not surprised. I had been with him for several days the week before, and I could feel that he was getting to this place. So when I got the call, I said to him how much I appreciated his friendship and his stewardship of this great country of ours, and offered a suggestion which he followed up 30 minutes after he made his statement.
And Mr. Clyburn, what gave you the spidey sense that he was headed that way?
Well, when you've had, as I tell people, I just recently celebrated the 45th anniversary of my 39th birthday. And so that was my birthday. Sunday was my birthday. And I did a joke with him that this is a hell of a birthday present that I'm getting from you. So that adds up to 84 years. And I've been around politics all of my life. I was elected president of my NAACP Youth Council when I was 12 years old. My mother was a big fundraiser for the NAACP as a beautician. And John Lewis and I met as 19-year-old college students.
Amazing.
So I'm one of the founders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I've been around this stuff. And you feel it, you can see it. And we spent 2 days together in Las Vegas at the NAACP National Conference and the National Bar Association. And I rode out with them on Air Force One. I could see it developing. And so when I got the call, I was not surprised at all.
Congressman Clyburn, you led dozens of your colleagues yesterday in meeting with Israeli citizens whose families suffered from the terrorist attack of October 7th. It was in lieu of attending the joint congressional address by Prime Minister Netanyahu. What did you learn from those hostage family members?
The thing that came through to me more than anything else was how, let's just say, disappointed these people are in the leadership of Israel. And it reinforced what I have been saying for several years now, that the people of Israel, I said to them on yesterday, my father was a minister. He preached as often from the Old Testament as he did from the New. And I grew up with a healthy respect for the people of Israel. My favorite president thus far in history is Harry Truman, who recognized Israel within seconds of it declaring itself as an independent state. And that's one of the things I give Truman credit for. But the leader, Netanyahu, who we heard on yesterday, some of us saw, has not been a good steward of the Israeli people. And that came through with them on yesterday. 3 families represented, and they were very strong in their opposition to Netanyahu.
We have a very politically astute, passionate audience, both here in DC and virtually around the world. I would be a fool if I didn't ask you why Harry Truman's your favorite president.
Well, I guess it's because when I was growing up, my dad made us do two things. Every morning before breakfast, we had to recite a Bible verse. He never told us to read the Bible. He just told us that every morning you must recite a Bible verse. You can't say the same one twice. And on the day he gave the rule, he took Jesus' whip off the table. And so we had to all do that. But every evening, before retiring to bed, we had to share with him a current event. We didn't have television, so we had to read the newspapers. And I became enamored with Harry Truman's race. I was 8 years old when he got elected president against Thomas Dewey. And here's this guy who is not highly educated, didn't have a college degree, handicapped, small stature, common, ordinary background, and he becomes president of the United States. He beats this big, wealthy icon from New York, and I started studying him. And I have studied him. My favorite book outside of the Bible is McCullough's book on Truman. I keep that book at my beck and call, and I refer to that book often. So Harry Truman is just my guy through and through. And when the president got to we were going out together to the National Convention. And I said to him, I said, you know, ask your staff to take a look at Truman's speech to the NAACP. He was the first president to address the NAACP. And he did. And he opened his speech out there referencing Truman's 1947 speech, which led to two committees being created by him to deal with this issue of racism. And he integrated the armed services in 1948. All was a build up to that. If you go through Truman's entire presidency, I think you would find out why he's my favorite president.
That's what we call a pro tip. Mr. Clyburn, you've known Vice President Harris going back to when she was senator from my home state of California. What should we know about Vice President Harris that we don't?
She is very smart, a steel trap mind. One of the things I'm looking forward to, and I heard one of your earlier guests talk about the debate that's coming up between her and Trump. I'll just say to him, be careful what you ask for.
What would you watch for from Vice President Harris in a debate with former President Trump?
How she retorts. I was a debater in college, and I can tell you the debate is not as much about the subject matter as it is about your ability to deflect.
It's the cross, right?
Absolutely. And she is absolutely great with that. All those people, when she was in the Senate, and those folks came before her, and she was questioning them, ask Kavanaugh about her. And, most especially, Sessions. I don't know how many remember her questioning Sessions. He is still trying to find out what hit him in that. She's great.
Congressman, you talked with the notice about how Vice President Harris has grown in office. You said most people I've talked to have said they'd noticed a marked difference in the last year and a half. What are they noticing? What are you noticing?
She has grown into the job, and that is what is necessary with all people. Don't try to bring the position down to you, grow into it. And she has grown into this job remarkably, and people are beginning to see it. They appreciate it. And the guy she's running against, he attempted to bring the position down to him, made it all about him, rather than grow into the presidency. And that is what I think people will see on display in this campaign.
In that same interview, you had a soundbite for the ages, a notable quotable. You said, former President Trump may be older, but she's more mature. Do tell.
That's quite true. If you want to be objective, just look at the two of them, look at them lay out a vision for the country, look at how they conduct themselves, look at how they set examples for our children and our grandchildren. And I ask you, which one of these people you would want to see your children emulate as an adult? Just answer the question And I think that you.
Well, we were chatting backstage with Mignon, Bree, yourself, and you were talking about how the Trump people were the worst. And I said, could they win? And you said, sure. Like, what do you make of that calculus?
Well, I just happen to study history every day. There's not a day that goes by when I don't see or hear something that makes me go and Google something and start looking at it. 1876, what they were doing on January 6, 2021, was trying to replicate what happened in the presidential election of 1876 when Rutherford B. Hayes became president of the United States, the only time we've had our election determined by the House of Representatives. And Rutherford B. Hayes became president of the United States by one vote over Samuel Tilden, who needed 185, got 184 in the Electoral College. And then when they got to the House of Representatives, the House put together a committee of 15 people to study the issue and make recommendations to the House as to who should get those 20 votes in question coming from South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. They decided to give those votes to Hayes, and the committee voted 8-7 to give the votes to Hayes. Why? Because Hayes promised, give me those 20 votes, I'll bring an end to Reconstruction, I'll take the federal troops out of the South, and I will live the Negro up to your creative devices. That is what changed the whole trajectory of this country, that won those two one-vote margins. And so that's what I'm talking about when you hear me talk about things like that.
You have a kitchen cabinet. You've been working for a couple of weeks to make sure that if there were a vacancy at the top of the Democratic ticket, that Vice President Harris would be the nominee. You were telling me there are forces in the party that thought that if President Biden went, she should go with them. Who are those forces and how did you stop them?
I won't tell you who they are. I'll just say go and read all of the news reports. But I saw it developing, and here's people saying we need to open up the process. What I said at the time that got misreported, I said we have a process in place, and those who are calling for an open process or a mini primary, I think is what they were calling it, I says this process lends itself well to a process that could be called a mini primary, and I support the process. And we're in that now. If you want to run for president, any one of you collect 300 signatures from 300 delegates, you can have your name put in the nomination. And you've got until the 1st of August to politic among them. And you could keep her from getting 1,950 votes, then we'll go into a process. But I said to everybody that would listen, don't ever fly in the face of history. History is our best instructor. I always say the best predictor of future performance is past behavior. Go to the past and see what happened to our party in 1968 in Chicago when we had an open process and ended up with Richard Nixon. Look at what happened in 1972 when our party had an open process down in Miami, and we got one state. We carried Massachusetts, lost all the other states. We did carry the District of Columbia. Look what happened to us in 1980. In 1980, Kennedy challenged Carter, the sitting president. And what happened? We lost and got Ronald Reagan. We do not win when we show ourselves to the American people as being in disarray, being on display, a big argument on the floor of the House, do that for 4 days on the floor of the convention, and then go out to the American people and says, I'm ready to bring the country together. Though I couldn't get together at my convention, I can bring you together. We need to go into Chicago together. Go there, have a love fest, hold ourselves out to the American people as someone who know how to get along with each other, so we can show you how to get along with each other.
Congressman, that's eye-opening. The vice president has had such a strong rollout and enviable, I believe it's 92 hours since the president's announcement. But you're making clear that that was not a fait accompli. That was not certain set in stone. That behind the scenes, there was work done that set that up.
Absolutely. A lot of work was done. And we started early. From the time I got the phone call from the president telling me what was going to happen in about an hour, I went to work right away to make sure that we did what was necessary to keep this process from getting out of hand.
And what was the first thing that you did in those few hours?
Well, the first thing I did was offer the president my suggestion as to what I thought was one of the best decisions he ever made, and that is picking Kamala Harris to be his running mate. Mm-hmm. And when he picked her, he said at the time that he picked her because he thought that she could step in on a moment's notice if anything were to happen to him. And I said to him, I believe that you need to make it very clear that you did not make a mistake when you picked her. And the only way I know to do that is for you to make it very clear that you're going to support her. And he did.
And I'm about to get the hook here. So one penultimate question. What else did you do to make sure that there was no funny business, as my mother would say?
What else? I called my kitchen cabinet. Text them.
You didn't just deploy them. You did call them. You deployed them. And their assignment was what?
Well, the assignment was just to, you know who our friends are. You know what our history is. You know what we've been talking about for 4 or 5 years. Let's make it happen.
And how would you rate the vice president's 92 hours since then?
A+.
And why?
I'm sorry?
Why?
Well, you know, because how much excitement has there been out there for her? How much money is being raised for her? And then I saw a crawl yesterday saying that voter registration is up, record high voter registration in just 3 or 4 days. And so if we can harness that, the energy is there. I always say that energy is great, but it must be harnessed in order to be effective. So if we can do what's necessary to harness the energy that she has generated and direct that energy to November 5th, we'll have an explosion that will get this country in this continuation of a more perfect union. We got sidetracked several years ago. Joe Biden has put us back on track. I think she can launch us to a great future.
And I have to underscore something that you said earlier that stuck in my mind. You said you study history every day. What is the lesson of history for Vice President Harris?
If you fail to learn the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them. I'm stealing from George Santayana here, but forgive me for doing that. It sounds pretty good to me.
And Mr. Clyburn, we always end with one fun thing. You like to golf. In the time you've been serving America in Congress, your golf game has gone downhill.
It has. I came to Congress a single-digit handicapper. The last time I saw my index a couple of weeks ago, it had gotten up to 15. That is not good. But I'm up to 84 years old, too.
Happy birthday. I
Thank
have
you.
to ask you, what's a life lesson from golf? How is golf like life or politics?
Well, I tell people all the time, if you let me play a round of golf with a person, I can tell you a whole lot about that person. You can tell who will take chances. You can tell who would take too long to make a decision. Those are the people I hate to play golf with. But the individuality of the game of golf brings out the personality in every person. And so I love to play golf with people when I'm trying to size them up.
And don't forget, you can tell who cheats.
You can always tell who cheats. And that's why I don't play golf with you know who.
I thank all of you for coming out. I thank the Axios events team. Thank you, Bank of America, for making these conversations possible. Thank you for joining us virtually around the world. We'd love to have breakfast every morning, axios.com/newsletters. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Clyburn, thanks for an amazing conversation. See you on axios.com.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was so great. Thank you.